Talking about movies is one of the internet's favorite pastimes, but over the last few years, the online film world has become increasingly focused on one website in particular, Rotten Tomatoes. Fans are using it more and more to judge whether a film is worth watching, and studios are beginning to listen, searching for a way to fight back against negative reviews and labeling the Rotten Tomatoes system destructive and unfair. But is the Rotten Tomatoes system flawed? Are movie fans using it correctly? And how exactly does Rotten Tomatoes really work? We'll answer all those questions right here on ScreenJunkies News. Now, to understand the full story behind Rotten Tomatoes, it's important to know where it came from and how it works. The site was founded in 1998 by a film fan named Sen Duong. Inspired by Duong's desire to consolidate reviews of Jackie Chan movies on one platform, Rotten Tomatoes rose as part of the dot-com boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. The site was first sold to IGN in 2004, then Flixster in 2010, Warner Brothers in 2011, and acquired by their current owners Fandango in 2016. Contrary to what some people believe, the Rotten Tomatoes site does not determine the fresh Rotten score of the movies being reviewed. It's an aggregate website where critics submit their reviews, which have all been featured originally on other websites, in newspapers, or as video reviews. And when a critic submits his or her review, they determine if their review is rotten or fresh. If a movie receives more than 60% good reviews, it's labeled fresh. If it receives 59% or fewer positive reviews, it's labeled rotten. And if a movie receives 40 or more reviews from Rotten Tomatoes approved critics, including 5 top critics, and maintains a score of 75% or higher, the movie is labeled certified fresh. Now, it's important to note the tomato meter percentage does not indicate the degree to which critics liked or disliked the movie, but the amount of good reviews versus bad reviews. This will be important later on. What started as an online movie critics database has quickly evolved into an ever-growing force in the entertainment industry. Realizing the site's growing influence, studios began seizing on certified fresh ratings, first using them to help market movies on DVD and Blu-ray, and eventually folding good tomato meter ratings into their theatrical campaigns as well. Here's part of a trailer Sony released this summer to capitalize on the early buzz for Edgar Wright's Baby Driver.
You're damn right.
What studios quickly began to notice, however, is that the tomato meter cuts both ways. While good reviews were proving to be useful marketing, bad reviews started becoming the driving force behind media coverage of an increasing number of blockbuster movies. Warner Brothers found itself mired in a firestorm centered around the bad tomato meter score of both Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice and Suicide Squad, stories that threatened to overshadow the release of the films themselves. This triggered a backlash against the site, including an online petition to shut it down, and criticism from filmmaker Brett Ratner, who said Rotten Tomatoes was, quote, the worst thing we have in today's movie culture, and, quote, the destruction of our business. The financial implications of a bad tomato meter score are also heavy on studio executives' minds. The National Research Group found that 7 out of 10 people surveyed said a poor Rotten Tomatoes score would discourage them from seeing a movie. And Physiology found that moviegoers 25 and younger are particularly sensitive to Rotten Tomatoes. This theory may hold weight, as some 2017 summer movies like Baywatch and Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Men Tell No Tales have seen lackluster opening weekends, seemingly fueled by poor reviews. Deadline reported that some studios were considering holding off critic screenings until opening day or canceling them altogether. And while this may sound like a drastic measure, it's not an unrealistic one. A study commissioned by 20th Century Fox found that the influence of Rotten Tomatoes is growing, particularly among Hollywood's coveted younger demographic. The report suggested that the studio combat potential bad reviews by, quote, not giving the critics a chance to slam you. It may help to at least preserve your Friday. And remember Sony Pictures, the studio that proudly trumpeted Baby Driver's 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes? They delayed critic screenings for 2 of their biggest summer releases, The Emoji Movie and The Dark Tower, to soften the blow of potential bad reviews. So, is Rotten Tomatoes hurting the industry by giving movies a bad rap, or do studios just need to take ownership of the movies that they're making? The answer lies in how the Rotten Tomatoes data is interpreted. Now, the number that most people pay attention to when looking at Rotten Tomatoes is the tomato meter. While a useful indication of basic critical consensus, tomato meter data is inherently flawed as a research tool. The binary fresh rotten option tends to polarize critical consensus, distorting the apparent quality of a lot of films both positively and negatively. Let's look at one of the most oft-cited disputes on Rotten Tomatoes, the rating of Marvel films versus the rating of Warner Brothers DCEU films. Here they are when charted by tomato meter score. 10 of the Marvel films rank above 80%, with only Wonder Woman representing the DCEU in the fresh category. The gulf between the two studios seems large, with the rotten Man of Steel lagging behind Marvel's last place film, The Incredible Hulk, and Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad languishing in the 20% range. But there's another, arguably more important number that almost no one cites when referencing Rotten Tomatoes: the average rating. The average rating allows critics to rate a film from 1 to 10, allowing for a much more varied set of data for each movie. Let's look at the Marvel-DC relationship when charted by average rating. This presents a far more detailed picture, as only one of the Marvel movies carries a rating above 8.0. The vast majority of Marvel films receive a ranking between 7.0 and 8.0, denoting strong but not uniformly exceptional quality. You can also see that Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad are much closer to the other films. And remember Man of Steel, which was certified rotten at 55% on the tomato meter? Its average rating is actually 6.2, identical to Marvel's The Incredible Hulk, a movie that's listed 12% higher on the tomato meter at a fresh 67%. This kind of nuance, particularly with divisive or mediocre films, is lost in a binary system. And this difference doesn't just affect comic book movies. Of the 287 movies released in 2016 that received 40 or more reviews, the benchmark to be certified fresh, 142 scored 80% or better on the tomato meter, creating a jumbled group of films at the top of the list. Finding Dory's 94% fresh reading beat La La Land and Arrival's 93% rating. Best Picture winner Moonlight's 98% is only slightly higher than The Jungle Book's 95%, or even Doctor Strange and Captain America Civil War's 90%. Viewing things strictly by the tomato meter gives the false impression that all these positive reviews are equally enthusiastic, when in fact there's a huge difference between a rave review and a mixed but positive one. Viewing the Rotten Tomatoes results by average rating paints a much clearer picture of how these films were really received. When sorted by average rating, only 27 of 2016's films scored an 8.0 rating or higher. La La Land's average rating of 8.6 and Arrival's average rating of 8.3 easily eclipsed Finding Dory's rating of 7.6, despite the Pixar films scoring higher on the tomato meter, meaning that La La Land and Arrival earned reviews that were much more enthusiastic. Moonlight's 9.0 also dwarfs the 7.7, 7.6, and 7.3 reviews of The Jungle Book, Civil War, and Doctor Strange, creating further separation at the top and putting the Oscar winner in a class by itself. And remember the middle ground that I mentioned earlier? Let's look at how it affected some of last summer's biggest films. Jason Bourne's 5.9 rating translated to a 56% rotten score, while Central Intelligence's lower 5.7 rating translated to a 69% fresh, and X-Men Apocalypse's 5.6 netted it a 48% rotten. A great example of the massive difference mixed to positive and mixed to negative reviews can do to a movie's Rotten Tomatoes score. So what do all these numbers mean? Well, much like Rotten Tomatoes itself, the situation is much more complex than it appears on the surface. In one aspect, critics of Rotten Tomatoes are right. The tomato meter does skew the picture when viewed solely by fresh rotten rating, by often overinflating positive numbers and making some movies look worse than they are. But, with rare exceptions, Rotten Tomatoes doesn't fundamentally misrepresent the overall critical consensus about a film, just the degree to which critics like or dislike it. Unfortunately, reviews aren't just a component of a movie story, they're quickly becoming the story, weaponized for good and evil by studios in their advertisements and by fans on social media and discussion boards. And studios are starting to fear its wrath. So what can be done to improve this situation? For Rotten Tomatoes, a focus on educating its users on what its site is and how it functions is a step in the right direction. Further emphasizing its average rating feature, which is difficult to see on the website and not present on its mobile site, would also help educate consumers more as to the actual critical consensus for its movies. A more drastic step would be to stop featuring the fresh rotten percentage altogether and instead substituting a movie's average rating. This would remove some of the ambiguity and keep the user experience simple and easy to understand. Now, critics like me and the others here at ScreenJunkies should also bear some responsibility, ensuring that our opinions are direct and focused, free from the kind of dogpiling that can occur when a critical consensus begins to emerge, good or bad, with a movie. Studios have also played their part in escalating Rotten Tomatoes' influence by using the site's positive scores to advertise their films. They legitimize the site and its influence. They need to decide what their own stance on Rotten Tomatoes is by either accepting negative scores or not using the site to promote their films when the scores are good. And instead of hiding bad movies from critics, maybe they should see poor reviews not as the toxic byproduct of an unjust system, but as a sign that maybe they just made a bad movie that people didn't want to see. But the biggest responsibility falls on you, the moviegoer. Rotten Tomatoes is a flawed system, but at its core, it's a resource, a tool, it's a means to an end. Don't just look at a movie score, read the reviews. Find critics you like, follow the ones you trust, the ones that seem aligned to your tastes, and be more skeptical of the critics whom you disagree with. Really look at what the critics are saying. A rotten score doesn't mean a movie's bad. Some of the most interesting movies ever made are also the most divisive. Expand your horizons. If Rotten Tomatoes doesn't provide a consensus you feel you can trust, other sites like Metacritic use different systems of expressing critical opinion that might be more to your liking. But most importantly, make up your own mind. The best way to judge whether a movie is good or bad is to see it and decide for yourself. Don't argue about reviews. See films and engage in vigorous, informed debate with others who have done the same. That's what most movie critics are here to encourage: vigorous discussion about film. Good and bad reviews may change over time or be forgotten, but the satisfaction that comes with seeing a movie and forming your own opinion will always be certified fresh. Thanks for watching Screen Junkies News. You can click, select, tap, whatever you want. The box is on screen to watch even more Screen Junkies News, and don't forget to click the logo to subscribe.